Ethan Walker drove until the road turned to dust and the dust turned to silence. He had left the city before sunrise, a small bag in the passenger seat, a map on his lap, and a simple plan in his mind. He wanted a quiet place where he could breathe and hear his thoughts. For years he had worked in noisy labs and crowded hallways, always rushing, always answering someone. He liked his work, but the noise had filled his head and stayed there like a song he could not turn off. So he came to the desert, a wide space of red stone, blue sky, and golden grass where time felt slow and kind. He set up his tent near a creek that slid through a narrow canyon. The water was clear and cool. Small fish flashed like silver coins below the surface. He placed a flat stone near the entrance of his tent, then set his notebook on it. He made coffee on a small stove and watched the steam curl up like a thin ghost. The air smelled of warm dust and juniper. When the sun rose higher, the canyon walls lit up, layer by layer until they glowed. Ethan loved the way the land told a patient story. He ran his fingers over the red rock, feeling the fine grains of time. As a geologist, he knew this place was older than his mind could hold. He traced lines in the stone like soft handwriting, reading what wind and water had written. He moved slowly with his pencil and his hammer, taking notes, sketching shapes, touching the earth with care. He wanted to leave no marks that did not need to be there. Days found a rhythm that calmed him. He woke to birds and the soft trickle of water. He boiled oats and drank coffee while the sky changed color. He walked the canyon, took small samples, and wrote. When the heat rose, he sat in the shade and listened to the breath of the light wind. At night, he lay under a spread of stars that felt close enough to touch. He thought of nothing special, and that felt like a gift. On the fourth afternoon, when the light turned gentle and long, he heard a sound that did not belong to the creek or the wind. It was a steady beat, soft at first, then clear enough to make his feet feel it. He stood surprised. The sound was like a heart in the open air, slow and sure. He followed it along the creek, staying careful with each step. He did not want to disturb anyone. He only wanted to understand the sound and where it lived. Around a bend in the canyon, he saw them, a small Apache camp in a flat area where cottonwood trees cast cool shade. There were a few tents, a cooking fire that burned low, and a circle where several people sat talking in quiet voices. The drumbeat came from a little farther away, where an older man tapped the drum with calm hands, his face kind and focused. Children moved near the trees, playing with soft laughter. The scene felt complete, like a circle he had stepped into by accident. Ethan stopped where he was. He did not want to intrude. He stood in the open so they could see him, his hands at his sides, his shoulders relaxed. A woman noticed him and nodded. Another person spoke to him, not with words he knew, but with a gentle tone and a hand raised in greeting. Ethan raised his own hand, a small smile on his face. He stepped back once, giving them space. He felt both welcome and careful, and he respected that balance. Then he saw her. She stood near the edge of the shade where sun and shadow met. She was a young woman with a strong, thoughtful face and long, dark hair tied back from her eyes. She watched him with quiet study, not unkind, not eager, simply present and alert. Later, he would learn her name was Nita, and that she was a person people listened to, someone who chose her words and her silences with care. In that first moment, she said nothing. He felt her gaze like a line between them, clear and honest. Ethan gave a small bow of his head, a gesture of respect he used when he was unsure what to say. He wanted to show that he meant no harm and that he knew this place was not his. He stepped back again, then turned and walked away the way he had come, the drumbeat fading behind him like a heartbeat returning to rest. When he reached his tent, he sat on the flat stone and looked at the creek. He realized his own heart had quickened. He was not afraid, only awake in a new way. That night, as the stars assembled over the canyon, Ethan wrote in his notebook. He wrote about the sound of the drum, the calm faces, the children's soft laughter. He wrote about the young woman who had said nothing and yet had told him something with her eyes. He wrote that her gaze felt like a question. Who are you, and do you know where you stand? He closed the notebook and lay back, listening to night birds, feeling as if the desert itself had nodded to him and then looked away. In the morning, he did as he always did. He made coffee, ate a simple breakfast, and walked. But the day had a new weight to it, a new color. He moved with more care than before. He noticed each footprint he made. He picked up small bits of trash left by others, a bottle cap, a loop of old string, and tucked them into his pack. He spoke softly when he spoke at all. He felt he was sharing space now, not merely visiting it. Later that day, he saw Nita again. She was standing on a slope above the creek, gathering herbs with a small basket on her arm. The way she moved was steady and sure, as if the hillside itself knew her steps. Ethan stopped on the far side of the water. He did not call out. He waited until she looked his way and then lifted his hand in greeting. She nodded without a smile, and her face told him, "It is fine that you are there as long as you stay there." He watched the water for a moment so she would not feel stared at. Then he turned and walked on, but he could not help glancing back. He saw her test the leaves with careful fingers and place them into her basket one by one, like placing small promises. He wondered what the herbs were used for, and then he reminded himself that not every question needed to be asked, and not every detail was his to know. He let the question be a quiet stone in his pocket and kept walking. In the days that followed, Ethan settled into a gentle pattern. He walked farther in the mornings and returned to the creek by noon. Sometimes he saw the camp from a distance, smoke rising in a thin line. Sometimes he heard the soft sound of voices or a song that carried just enough for him to feel it in his chest. He stayed on his side of the water unless he was invited to cross, and he never was. He was fine with that. He liked the idea that respect could be a path, and he wanted to walk it well. Once, late in the afternoon, he found a smooth piece of agate in the creek bed. It was the size of a robin's egg and shone when he turned it in his palm. He thought of keeping it, then thought again. He set it on a flat rock at the edge of the water, a small thank you to the place. The next day the agate was gone. He did not know who had taken it or whether the creek had moved it on. He liked both ideas. He and Nita began to share small exchanges at a distance. A nod, a glance toward the sky when a hawk passed. Once she pointed to the cottonwoods to warn him of a loose branch creaking above the path he was about to take. He looked up, stepped back, and smiled a quiet thank you across the water. She lifted 2 fingers in reply and went on with her work. These simple moments grew into a thread that did not need many words. Ethan thought often about the word solitude. He had come to the desert to be alone, but the more time he spent here, the more he understood that true quiet was not the same as lonely. The land itself was full of voices. The creek, the wind, the birds, the soft stir of leaves. And then there were the human voices, close by but still their own. His days were simple, yet they felt rich. He slept well and woke with ease. He began to feel at home, though he knew he was still a visitor. One evening, as the sun slid down and painted the canyon walls in warm red, Ethan walked along the creek and saw Nita sitting on a rock with her back straight and her hands resting on her knees. She looked at the water as if it were a book she had read 100 times and still loved. He started to turn away to give her privacy, but she lifted her hand in a small gesture that said he could stay, there, on his side of the creek. He sat on the bank and watched the current. After a while she spoke, her voice low and even. "You listen," she said. "Not everyone does." He turned his head, surprised and grateful. "I try," he said. "This place teaches me how." He looked back at the water. "I do not want to disrespect it." "Or you," she nodded once. "Listening is a kind of respect." She did not say more, and he did not press for more. The creek moved between them like a steady friend, and in the space of that shared quiet, a new kind of peace took root. On a different day, a child from the camp ran along the water's edge chasing a dragonfly. The child stumbled, and Ethan instinctively took a step forward, but the child caught balance and laughed. Nita had been near enough to see. She glanced at Ethan, then at the child, and then she gave the smallest smile, more in her eyes than on her mouth. It lasted only a moment, but it warmed him. He understood that trust was not a door you pushed open. It was a path you walked, one careful step at a time. Morning came clear and bright, the kind of light that makes every small thing easy to see. Ethan woke early and listened to the creek as if it were speaking to him again. He boiled water, made coffee, and felt the warm cup in his hands. The sky was wide and kind. He thought of Nita's calm voice from the evening before. "You listen." The words stayed with him, not as praise but as a reminder. He wanted to keep listening, not only to the land but also to the quiet places in another person. He began the day by checking a line of rocks he had set along the path to mark a safe route when the sandy soil felt soft. He moved one stone, then another, making sure the trail stayed gentle on feet. He picked up a scrap of string a wind had blown near a bush and tucked it in his pack. He had learned that care has many forms and most of them are small. Later, while the sun was still soft, he saw Nita near the cottonwoods. She was showing two children how to weave thin grasses into a cord. Her hands moved with steady grace and the children copied her motions. Ethan stayed a good distance away and watched without staring, like a person who respects a closed door. One of the children looked up and saw him. The child waved a quick hello. Nita did not turn, but he saw the slight lift of her shoulder that told him she knew he was there, and that his quiet presence was acceptable. He lifted a hand in return and went on with his walk. He spent the afternoon making notes about the rock layers and the way the creek curved this year. He had been in many canyons and he knew how a stream could step out of its bed when the sky changed without warning. He ran his fingers over a pale line on the wall that marked an old high-water point like a memory in stone. He drew it carefully in his notebook. As he sketched, he felt a gentle unease move through him. The air held a faint weight as if a thought waited to be spoken. Clouds gathered toward evening, soft at first, then thicker. The wind shifted in a way his skin could feel. He looked to the northwest and saw a darker band near the horizon. It might pass. It might not. He closed his notebook and began to tidy his camp. He put loose things inside his tent and packed the small stove. He tied the tent lines a little tighter and checked the ground for the best high spot near a cluster of stones. The creek still ran clear at his feet, and the cottonwoods still threw their gentle shade, but the feeling in the air had changed. He heard footsteps and turned. Nita stood by the edge of the water as calm as ever, but her eyes also searched the sky. "Storm?" she said, and it was not a question. He nodded. "It smells like rain far off," he answered. "Maybe in the hills." She looked at the creek, then at his tent. "High ground," she said. He had already thought the same thing, and her short words made him feel steady. "Yes," he said. "I was about to move things." She pointed to a flat rise not far upstream where the ground held firm. "Better," she said. He thanked her, and she lifted her hand in reply and moved away with a long, sure stride. Ethan worked quickly but without panic. He carried his pack to the higher spot and set it under the protective curve of a rock. He took down the tent and rolled it tight. The clouds gathered and began to speak in a distant voice. A cool edge touched the wind. He glanced toward the camp and saw movement. People were securing corners, bringing things under shelter, making sure the children were near the adults. He felt a quiet hum of readiness move through the canyon, as if everyone knew the same song and did not need to sing it out loud. A few drops struck the dust, making small, dark spots that faded, then returned. The wind came in a new direction, and with it came the sound of rain not here but somewhere upstream, the kind of sound that tells a person to pay attention. Ethan stood by the water and watched it with calm eyes. The creek did not change at first. Then it did. It darkened a shade, then another. It began to move with a touch more purpose. He took a slow breath and stepped back from the bank. Nita appeared again, her hair tied close, her face steady. "Your things safe?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "Thank you for the advice." She nodded, then looked upstream. The sound of rain grew louder, though the drops here were still light. The air held the kind of hush that comes before a big change. The children at the camp were gathered now, their small voices held close by the adults. An elder spoke in a low tone, calm and even, and the children listened. The first true rush of water came like a long sigh. It was not wild, only fuller, as if the creek took a deeper breath. The water lifted leaves and carried them along. Twigs followed. The surface, once smooth, began to speak in small ripples around stones. Ethan measured the rise with his eyes and took another step back. He thought of an old rule in his field. Water remembers more than you do. He felt the truth of it in his bones. He looked toward the camp again and saw a boy near the edge of the trees, not far from the water. The boy had been with Nita earlier, the one who had chased a dragonfly. Now he was watching the creek with big, curious eyes. The adults were busy tying down a canvas flap. No one was close to the boy at that moment. Ethan did not rush. He did not shout. He walked at a steady pace toward the boy, his palms open, his voice gentle. "Hey there," he said in a kind tone. "Let's stand a little farther back. The water is growing." The boy looked at him, then at the water that had climbed another inch. He nodded and took a step. The ground near the bank had turned slick. The boy's foot slid. Not far, not fast, but enough to tilt his balance. Ethan reached out and offered his hand. The boy took it, and Ethan helped him step to safer ground. The whole action lasted a breath. It was simple and calm, the way you pass a cup from one person to another. Nita had seen the small slide. She was there in a few long strides, her eyes checking the boy from head to toe. The boy held Ethan's hand for one more second, then let go and moved to Nita's side. She touched the top of his head lightly and looked at Ethan. In her gaze there was thanks and something more, a kind of recognition that grows when people meet a challenge together, even a small one. Rain began in earnest then, soft at first, then steady. The creek swelled, not a wall but a widening. The water rose over the old line where feet had sometimes stood, and it asked for more space. Everyone gave it. The camp had already moved the most important things to higher ground, and now they stepped back in a calm, organized way. Ethan followed their lead and kept an eye on the water. The air smelled bright and clean like stone and sky. The gray clouds pressed low, and the canyon walls wore a deeper color as if they had been polished. Through the evening, the rain came and went in waves. The creek rose and then held steady, then rose again by a small hand's width. Ethan stayed near his packed gear on the high spot watching, ready to help if needed but careful not to take up space. He offered an extra rope when he saw someone tying down a cover. He lent a hand to carry a basket to a safer place, taking care to ask with his eyes before lifting anything. Each time a nod gave permission, and each time he set the item exactly where he was told. The work felt like a quiet dance of trust. By night the rain slowed to a mist. The creek still ran strong, but the sharp edge of worry had passed. The elders spoke in soft voices. Children settled under blankets. Someone lit a small lantern that glowed like a warm star in the camp's center. The sound of the water became a lullaby instead of a warning. Ethan sat on the rock near his gear and breathed a long, easy breath. He felt the day settle inside him like a smooth stone returned to its place. Nita approached, her steps light on the damp ground. She stood near him, not too close, and looked at the creek. "You moved quick but not loud," she said. "Thank you for helping my brother." Ethan felt a quiet warmth rise in his chest. He had not known the boy was her family, but it made sense now. "He has a good sense for the water," Ethan said. "Just needed one steady step." Nita's mouth softened into a small smile. "One steady step can be a bridge," she said. They stood together listening to the softened flow. For a while neither of them spoke. Then Ethan said, "I've been mapping the high water lines. I can show you the places the creek seems to like when it grows. It might help to plan safe paths for the next storm." Nita listened. "You can show me," she said. "And you can learn our paths too. The land keeps old roads." The next days were full of bright, clean air. The storm had washed the canyon and left everything shining. The creek had drawn new curves in the sand. The cottonwoods held drops that caught the sun. People put things back where they belonged. Laughter returned to the open spaces. Ethan walked with Nita along the banks. He pointed out marks on the walls and shapes in the earth that told him how water moved. She showed him where the ground held firm even when wet, and where it only looked safe. They drew lines in the sand with a stick, then walked those lines and learned them by foot. The boy came too, light on his feet, and he liked to run ahead and call back the small changes he saw. In the quiet times, Ethan and Nita talked in simple words. He told her how the city had made him tired inside, not in his body but in his thoughts. She told him that silence had a sound, and that it could be full or empty depending on how you met it. He asked about the herbs she gathered, and she told him what the leaves could do in general terms, careful and respectful. He did not pry. She did not keep count. They shared what felt right and left the rest in peace.